In the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, on a rain-slicked avenue in some forgotten corner of rural America, Elias Thorne first laid eyes on the woman who would unravel his world. He was 28 then, a man adrift after years of scraping by in dead-end jobs, haunted by the ghost of a childhood he'd long tried to bury. The air hung heavy that night, thick with the scent of wet earth and distant thunder, as if the sky itself sensed the storm brewing. She stood at the edge of a rundown diner, her silhouette sharp against the neon buzz, her dark hair cascading like shadows over a face that seemed both familiar and impossibly alluring. "Lost?" she asked, her voice a low murmur that cut through the patter of rain, drawing him in like a moth to flame. Little did Elias know, as he stepped closer, offering a shy smile and a shared umbrella, that this encounter was no accident, that she had been watching, waiting, her eyes gleaming with a hunger born of twisted secrets long concealed. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, laced with an undercurrent of intimacy that felt predestined, as if their souls had brushed before in some shadowed past. By dawn, as the storm broke and the world awoke, Elias felt a spark ignite within him, oblivious to the abyss yawning just beneath the surface, where love twisted into something profane, something that would force him to confront the unimaginable, a bond forged in blood, now corrupted beyond redemption. In the hollowed-out town of Black Hollow, Ohio, where the coal mines had closed decades earlier and left behind only rust and silence, Elias Thorne came into the world in the winter of 1997. His father, a drifter named Ray who sold bootleg cigarettes and broken promises, vanished 3 weeks after the birth, slipping out the back door of the sagging trailer with nothing but a duffel bag and the echo of a slammed screen. The abandonment was so complete that no one in town could even recall what Ray looked like by the time Elias was old enough to ask. Left alone with a newborn, Marlene Thorne began to change. She had always been fragile, a woman whose beauty seemed borrowed from another life, but now something inside her cracked open and never quite closed again. She stopped leaving the trailer for days at a time. The curtains stayed drawn. The television flickered constantly, casting blue light across the walls like a perpetual dusk. She spoke to Elias in whispers meant for an adult, telling him secrets no child should hear, pressing her lips too close to his ear, holding him against her chest long after feeding had ended. When he cried, she rocked him with a ferocity that felt less like comfort and more like ownership. By the time Elias was 5, Marlene had begun dressing him in his father's old clothes, flannel shirts that hung to his knees, a cracked leather belt cinched tight around his tiny waist. "You're the man of the house now," she would say, her fingers lingering on the collar as she adjusted it, her eyes glassy and far away. She taught him to call her Marley when they were alone, a pet name she claimed had once belonged only to her husband. At night she pulled him into the narrow bed they shared, her arms locked around him like iron bands, murmuring that no one would ever love him the way she did, that the world outside would only hurt him. She cut his hair herself with kitchen scissors, shaping it to match the few faded photographs of Ray she kept hidden in a showbox. When neighbors knocked, concerned about a child who never played outside, Marlene met them at the door with a smile sharp enough to draw blood and said Elias was sick, always sick, too delicate for the rough hands of strangers. School became a distant rumor. Elias learned to read from the captions on soap operas and the labels on soup cans. His world shrank to the 4 peeling walls, the smell of cigarette smoke and lilac perfume, and the weight of his mother's gaze that followed him from room to room, hungry, possessive, absolute. By the age of 10 he already understood, without words, that he belonged to her completely, and that belonging felt less like safety and more like slow drowning. As Elias edged into adolescence, the air in the trailer thickened with something unspoken and corrosive. He was 13 when his body began to change, shoulders broadening, voice dropping into a register that startled them both. Marlene watched the transformation the way a jeweler studies a stone catching new light, fascinated, almost reverent. She started buying him cologne, cheap drugstore bottles that smelled of pine and desperation, and sprayed it on his neck herself, her fingers lingering at the hollow of his throat. "Smell like a man," she whispered, inhaling deeply, eyes half closed as though the scent alone could summon back what she had lost. She bought him clothes that fit too well, jeans that hugged his lengthening legs, shirts with buttons she insisted on fastening herself. When he tried to dress alone in the bathroom, she waited outside the door, tapping her nails against the wood until he emerged. Privacy became an old word neither of them used anymore. At night she still pulled him into her bed, claiming the couch hurt her back, But now her hands moved differently, tracing the new lines of muscle along his arms, resting on his chest as if measuring the beat of a heart that was no longer entirely his own. She began speaking of love in ways that made his skin prickle. "You're mine in a way no one else ever could be," she said one evening, the television murmuring in the background while she combed his damp hair after a bath. "We share blood, baby. That's deeper than any ring or vow." She taught him to slow dance in the cramped living room, her cheek pressed to his, guiding his uncertain hands to the small of her back. The radio played old country songs about cheating hearts and forever loves, and she hummed along, her breath warm against his ear, her body fitting against his with a practiced intimacy that left him dizzy and ashamed. He started waking before dawn, staring at the water-stained ceiling while she slept curled against him, one leg thrown possessively over his. Shame lived in his stomach like spoiled milk, sour and constant. When he looked at other girls, glimpses through the window when the grocery delivery boy came, or faded magazine faces Marlene sometimes brought home, he felt a stab of betrayal, as though desire itself was treason. Marlene sensed it anyway. She would cup his chin, force his gaze back to her, and smile that brittle, beautiful smile. "They'll never understand you the way I do," she said. "They'll never keep you safe." By 15, Elias understood the shape of the cage even if he couldn't name it. The outside world shrank to a rumor of wind against the trailer walls, while inside, every glance, every touch, every murmured endearment tightened the knot a little more. The summer Elias turned 17, the trailer park finally caught the attention of someone who refused to look away. A new social worker, a woman named Carla Ruiz with tired eyes and a clipboard full of red flags, knocked 3 times in 1 week. Each time Marlene met her at the door in a silk robe, hair perfectly curled, voice syrupy with excuses. "He's homeschooled," she said. "He's shy. He has a condition." Elias hovered in the shadows, mute, trained to disappear the moment a stranger's shadow crossed the threshold. On the 4th visit, Carla brought a sheriff's deputy. They pushed past Marlene's protests and found Elias in the back bedroom, thin, pale, eyes too old for his face, surrounded by stacks of romance novels and a single framed photograph of a man who looked disturbingly like him. The trailer reeked of mildew and something sweeter, cloying, like funeral flowers left too long in water. Carla took one look at the unmade double bed with its tangled sheets and knew enough. Within hours, Elias was in the back of a county car, staring through the window as Marlene screamed his name from the gravel driveway, her robe slipping off one shoulder, mascara carving black rivers down her cheeks. 2 days later, on a stretch of rain-slick highway outside Wheeling, West Virginia, Marlene Thorne's rust-red Pontiac spun out, flipped 3 times, and burst into flames. The body inside was burned beyond recognition, identified only by a melted silver locket engraved with the initials MT and a tiny baby footprint pressed into the metal decades earlier. Dental records confirmed it. The coroner signed the certificate. The county buried her in a pauper's grave while Elias, numb and silent, sat in a group home in Columbus watching the news on a cracked television screen. He did not cry. He had forgotten how. What no one knew, what no one could have known, was that the woman who died that night was not Marlene at all. The real Marlene had paid a drifter $3,000 and a bottle of oxycodone to wear her locket, drive her car, and disappear forever in fire. She watched the wreckage from a Greyhound window 20 miles away, a new dye job darkening her hair, a forged license in her purse that read Margaret Ellison, age 39. She pressed her fingers to the glass as the news chopper circled the smoking ruin, and for the first time in years she smiled without forcing it. She was free now. Free of debts, of questions, of a son who had begun to look at her with something dangerously close to recognition. She told herself the boy would be better off without her, that the state would raise him kinder than she ever could. But even as the bus carried her south, something cold and possessive coiled tighter in her chest, whispering that blood always finds its way home, no matter how far you run. 11 years slipped by like smoke. Elias drifted through foster homes and halfway houses, learned to weld in a county reentry program, and finally settled in the pine-shadowed town of Pine Ridge, Georgia, where nobody asked questions and the rent was cheap. He kept to himself, worked nights at the paper mill, and slept in a one-room apartment above a shuttered laundromat. At 28 he was quiet, courteous, and hollowed out in a way that made women want to fix him and men leave him alone. He still woke sometimes with the taste of lilac in his mouth and the ghost pressure of arms around his ribs. On a Thursday in late October, the mill's ancient boiler exploded, sending him to the emergency room with second-degree burns along his left forearm. The nurse who unwrapped the gauze had dark auburn hair twisted into a careless knot and eyes the color of creek water over shale. When she leaned close to change the dressing, the faint scent of lilac and cigarette smoke drifted from her skin, and Elias's heart lurched so violently he thought the monitor would scream. Her name tag read Ellison. She smiled the way people do when they already know your secrets. "You heal fast," she murmured, tracing the edge of the burn with a gloved finger. "Some men scar easy. Not you." Her voice carried the same low, intimate cadence that lived in the darkest corners of his dreams. He stared at her mouth, at the small scar just above her upper lip, something he remembered kissing once, long ago, when he was too young to know what kissing meant. Over the next weeks she found reasons to be near him, extra shifts when he came for follow-up, coffee brought without asking, a ride home offered on nights when rain hammered the streets like thrown gravel. Her name, she said, was Maggie. She was new in town, running from a bad divorce, looking for quiet. She laughed easily, touched his wrist when she spoke, and listened as though every word he uttered was the first she'd ever truly heard. The first time she kissed him, they were standing under the buzzing light outside his apartment. She tasted of spearmint and something darker, something that made his knees buckle. When she pressed against him, the years collapsed. He was 17 again and drowning. She whispered his name, his real name, not the one on his driver's license, against his lips, so softly he thought he imagined it. He didn't. By Christmas he was in love the way a man falls down a well, sudden, total, and certain there is no bottom. He did not see the way she watched him sleep, or how her fingers tightened on the steering wheel whenever he mentioned leaving Pine Ridge someday. He only felt the terrifying relief of coming home, of being wanted with an intensity that matched the hunger he had carried since childhood. The first night Maggie stayed over, Elias woke long before dawn with the sense that something was crawling inside his skull. The room was dark except for the orange glow of the street lamp bleeding through the blinds, striping her bare back where the sheet had fallen away. She lay on her stomach, one arm flung across his chest like a claim. In the half-light he saw the faint lattice of scars along her shoulder blades, thin white lines he had never noticed before, and the sight punched the air from his lungs. He knew those marks. He had traced them with toddler fingers while she sang him to sleep, had watched them fade as she aged. They were the remnants of a car accident when she was 19, the one she said had taken her first baby. He told himself it was coincidence. Scars look alike in the dark. But the dreams began that same night. They came in fragments, a trailer that smelled of lilac and mildew, a woman's voice calling him baby in a tone that made his skin crawl, the suffocating weight of arms that would not let go. Sometimes he was small again, barefoot on cracked linoleum, watching her dance alone to songs about broken hearts. Sometimes he was older, pressed beneath her on a narrow mattress while the television flickered blue across their joined shadows. He woke gasping every time, sheets twisted, her hand already reaching for him, soothing, murmuring that it was only a nightmare, that she was here now, that no one would ever hurt him again. She moved in before spring. She brought only 2 suitcases and a cedar box that locked with a tiny brass key. She cooked the foods he had forgotten he loved, meatloaf with brown sugar glaze, macaroni thick with Velveeta, sliced tomatoes sprinkled with salt the way she used to set in front of him when he was 8. She hummed the same lullabies under her breath while she washed dishes. When he caught her staring at him across the kitchen table, her eyes shone with tears she never explained. The sex was urgent, almost frantic, as though she were trying to crawl inside his skin. She bit his shoulder hard enough to bruise, whispered things against his throat that blurred the line between lover and mother until he couldn't tell which made him harder. Afterward she held him so tightly his ribs ached, her lips moving against his hair in silent prayers or threats, he was never sure which. He started sleeping with the light on. The dreams grew teeth. He saw her face flicker between Maggie's and Marlene's like a film reel skipping frames. He began checking her body while she showered, searching for the small brown birthmark shaped like a crescent moon that had once sat just above his mother's left hip. He never found it. She had covered it with tattooed vines years ago, she said, laughing, when he finally asked. Some nights he stood over her while she slept, heart hammering, convinced that if he looked long enough he would see the truth underneath the dye and the makeup and the 11 lost years. She always woke before he could decide what to do, smiling that slow, knowing smile, and pulled him back down into the dark. By the time the dogwoods bloomed blood-red along the county roads, Elias had stopped fighting the current. Maggie made it easy. She planned their days with quiet certainty, where they would eat, which back roads they would drive at dusk, how long he could stay at the mill before she began texting him to come home. She kept his phone on the dresser while he showered, read his mail before he saw it, and cried if he was 10 minutes late, tears that dried the instant he touched her face. He told himself this was love, the fierce kind people wrote songs about. In April he bought the ring with his overtime money, white gold, small diamond, nothing flashy. He proposed on the warped porch of the cabin they had started renting outside town, down on one knee in the sawdust and pollen, voice cracking while fireflies blinked on and off like faulty Christmas lights. She said yes before he finished the question, kissed him so hard his lips split against his teeth, and laughed the way she used to laugh when he was small and brought her dandelion bouquets, high, delighted, possessive. They married 3 weeks later in the county clerk's office on a Tuesday when no one else was waiting. She wore a cream lace dress that clung to every curve she still had, hair swept up to show the delicate nape he had kissed 1,000 times in another life. The clerk asked if anyone objected. Maggie's fingers tightened around Elias's until the bones ground together. No one spoke. They signed the certificate Margaret Ellison and Elias Raymond Thorne, the names neat and final in black ink. When the clerk pronounced them husband and wife, Maggie turned to him with tears on her lashes and whispered, "Now you can never leave me," so softly only he heard the threat inside the vow. That night they drove to a crumbling bed and breakfast on the Tennessee line, honeysuckle thick in the air, the kind of place that rented by the hour but let them have the bridal suite because no one else wanted it. She undressed him slowly, peeling away shirt and skin like she was unwrapping something sacred. When she pushed him onto the sagging mattress she straddled him, palms flat on his chest, and stared down with an expression he couldn't name, triumph, grief, starvation. She said his old pet name from childhood, the one no living soul should know, and smiled when he flinched. Then she rode him until the headboard cracked against the wall and the couple in the next room banged on the plaster in protest. Afterward she traced the faint burn scar on his forearm, the one earned the night they met, and told him scars were just love trying to stay close to the surface. He lay awake listening to her breathe, counting the years between the body beside him and the memory of a woman declared dead in a fiery wreck, trying to force the numbers to add up to something sane. They didn't. The honeymoon cabin sat on the edge of a blackwater lake where cypress knees rose like drowned fingers and Spanish moss hung so low it brushed the tin roof when the wind turned. They had the place to themselves. Maggie had paid cash for the whole week and told the owner they wanted no maid service, no interruptions, no questions. At night the only light came from a kerosene lantern and the red tip of her cigarette as she rocked on the porch swing, watching him through the screen door with the patience of something that has already won. On the third evening Elias found the photograph. He had gone to the bedroom for another bottle of bourbon and noticed her old cedar box sitting open on the dresser, the brass lock snapped clean in two. Inside, beneath folded silk scarves that still carried the ghost of lilac, lay a stack of Polaroids bound with a rotting rubber band. The top one showed a trailer he knew by heart, aluminum siding patched with duct tape, a plastic Virgin Mary on the cinderblock step, the same sagging clothesline where his tiny underwear once hung beside her lace bras. Someone had written 2009 on the white border in Marlene's looping handwriting. His hands shook so badly the rubber band snapped. He fanned the pictures across the quilt like tarot cards. There he was at 7, gap-toothed and solemn, sitting on Marlene's lap while she kissed the top of his head. There he was at 12, asleep on her chest, her fingers tangled in his hair exactly the way Maggie tangled them now. The last photograph was dated 3 weeks before their accident. Marlene standing in the trailer doorway, smiling straight at the camera, belly rounded with the pregnancy she never told anyone about, the pregnancy that supposedly ended in a miscarriage the same week the Pontiac burned. The bedroom door creaked. Maggie stood in the threshold wearing nothing but his mill shirt, unbuttoned, cigarette dangling from her lips. Moonlight carved hollows under her cheekbones and made the scar above her lip gleam like a silver thread. She looked at the scattered photographs, then at him, and exhaled smoke through her nose the way Marlene used to when she was deciding how much truth to give away. Some things, she said, voice soft as swamp water closing over a body, "are better left buried, baby." She stepped forward, bare feet silent on the pine floor, and began gathering the pictures one by one, smoothing each crease with the same tenderness she used when she touched his face. When she reached the final image, the one of her pregnant belly, her thumb lingered on the curve as though remembering the weight. Then she slipped the stack back into the cedar box, closed the lid, and turned the broken lock until it clicked like a jaw snapping shut. Outside, something heavy splashed in the lake and did not surface again. The morning after the photographs, Elias drove into town on the pretense of buying more bourbon. His hands trembled so violently he could barely hold the steering wheel. At the only stoplight he vomited into an empty coffee cup, the taste of bile and lilac thick on his tongue. He found the private investigator's office above a bail bondsman, a narrow room that smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. The man's name was Delbert Crow, 60-something, ex-state police, eyes the color of dishwater and a voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. Elias slid $500 in 20s across the desk and said he needed to know who his wife really was, no matter what it cost. Crow took the money, took Maggie's maiden name, took the marriage certificate Elias had stolen from her glove box, and told him to come back in 10 days. They were the longest 10 days of Elias's life. Maggie sensed the fracture immediately. She watched him with new wariness, trailing her fingers along his spine when he dressed for work, asking where he went when he claimed to be at the store. She started locking the cedar box in the truck of her car and wearing the key on a chain between her breasts. At night she clung harder, nails digging crescents into his back, whispering that no one would ever love him like she did, that outsiders only wanted to tear them apart. When he flinched from her touch she cried silently, tears soaking his collar, then punished him with tenderness so intense it felt like violence. On the 9th night he dreamed he was drowning in the Blackwater Lake while she stood on the dock holding the cedar box above her head, laughing as the photographs floated around her like white lilies. Crow called at dawn. Elias met him in the parking lot of a shuttered Piggly Wiggly, engine running, heat on full blast though the morning was already humid. The investigator handed over a thin manila folder and a flash drive. Inside were birth certificates, death certificates that had been altered then re-altered, social security numbers that looped back on themselves like Mobius strips. There was a police report from 2014 about a woman in Alabama who matched Maggie's description, arrested for stalking a man she claimed was her reincarnated husband. There were dental records that didn't quite match the burned corpse after all. And there, on the final page, a lab report from a private DNA test. Crow had paid a nurse to run on a coffee cup Elias left behind, 99.99% probability that Margaret Ellison and the late Marlene Thorne were the same person. Crow lit a cigarette and stared at Elias through the smoke. "Son," he said, "you didn't marry your wife. You married your mother. And she planned every damn second of it." Elias drove back to the cabin with the folder on the passenger seat like a live grenade. The pines blurred past, wet with afternoon rain, and every mile felt like driving deeper into his own grave. He kept seeing flashes, the way she used to measure his height against the trailer doorframe with a kitchen knife, the way she cried the day he turned 18 because my baby's all grown, the way she kissed his eyelids when he had fever and called it keeping the dreams away. Every memory now carried teeth. He found her on the dock, barefoot, feeding breadcrumbs to the turtles that basked on half-submerged logs. She wore the white sundress from their wedding day, hem dark with lake water, hair loose and wild the way it had been the first night she crawled into his childhood bed. When she heard his truck she turned, and the smile that spread across her face was the same one from the Polaroids, radiant, ravenous, ancient. He walked to the edge of the dock and stopped 3 feet away. The folder hung at his side, pages fluttering like trapped moths. "Tell me it isn't true," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. She tilted her head, studying him the way she used to study his report cards, pride and ownership braided so tight you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "Which part, baby?" she asked softly. "That I love you. That I came back for you. That everything I did was so we could finally be together the way we were always meant to be." She stepped closer. The scent of lilac and lake rot wrapped around him. "You were slipping away," she whispered. "Even before the social workers. I saw it in your eyes. You were starting to look at the door like it was something you could open. I had to let you go so you'd come back on your own. So you'd choose me. Her fingers brushed the ring on his left hand, the one he'd bought her, the one she now wore as his wife. "Blood remembers," she said. "I knew the second you walked into that emergency room you were mine again. You felt it too. That first look. You came home to me." She reached for his face. He jerked back as if she were poison. "You made me marry my own mother," he rasped. Her smile never wavered. "I made you marry the only person who will ever love you enough." She opened her arms, sundress clinging to her body, lake water dripping from her calves, and for one terrifying heartbeat he saw both women at once, the mother who rocked him to sleep and the wife who fucked him raw, superimposed like a double exposure. The dock swayed beneath his feet. Somewhere beneath them something large moved through the black water, slow and patient. The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes and the rest of Elias's life. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Every word came out soft, almost tender, the way she once explained why he couldn't have friends over or why the curtains had to stay closed. She told him how she had followed his progress through foster records and online searches, how she learned to forge documents and change faces the way other women learned new recipes. She told him about the night she paid the drifter to die in her place, how she sat in a motel bathtub and dyed her hair while the news played footage of the burning car, how she cried not from guilt, but from relief that the last obstacle between them was finally Ash. She told him she never stopped being his mother, not for 1 second, and that everything that happened afterward was simply the natural extension of that bond. "A mother's love doesn't end at childhood, baby," she said, stepping closer, lake water pooling around her bare feet. "It evolves. It deepens. It becomes the only thing that matters." Elias backed away until the dock rail pressed into his spine. The folder slipped from his fingers and the pages scattered across the water like white petals. He tried to scream and only a dry croak came out. His knees buckled. He saw flashes, her mouth on his at 7, at 17, at 28, the same mouth, the same hunger wearing different masks. When she reached for him he swung wildly. His fist connected with her cheekbone and the sound was wet, intimate, familiar. She didn't flinch. Blood trickled from her lip and she touched it with 2 fingers, then licked them clean, eyes never leaving his. "You can hate me," she whispered. "You can kill me. It doesn't matter. You're already mine forever. The marriage license says so. The nights you spent inside me say so. Even if you run, every time you touch another woman you'll feel me watching. Every time you close your eyes you'll taste lilac." He lunged past her, stumbled off the dock, and ran until the pines tore at his face and arms. Behind him her voice floated after him across the water, calm and loving, calling him home. He made it to the highway before the breakdown took him completely. A state trooper found him hours later curled in a ditch, rocking, repeating the same phrase over and over, "I'm married to my mother. I'm married to my mother." They took him to the county hospital, then to a locked ward in Atlanta. The marriage was annulled on grounds the courts had no language for. Marlene, or Maggie, or whatever name she wore now, was never found. The cabin had been paid for in cash, the truck was registered to a dead woman, the cedar box and its photographs were gone. Elias never spoke again except to ask for the lights to stay on. At night he sits by the window staring at nothing, waiting for the scent of lilac on air that has none, listening for footsteps that never quite arrive.